Well, good morning, everybody. I'm not sure what happens. Sarah says Sarah says they're already logged in, so I do not see them. So I am wondering what is going on, but I'm sure that they will be along shortly. Hmm.
Okay.
Aha!
Okay. You had said not to click go on air until we did a tech check, so I hadn't.
I know this thing is so weird. For some reason, it did not bring up the tech checks screen. It did.
Okay.
Well, welcome.
Sorry about that.
Thank you for coming to do this interview with me this morning. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, so this is for our Kickstarter. For everybody who's watching, to support Gunsmoke and Dragonfire, a fantasy western anthology. So I do believe that on the live broadcast there is a click or a pledge button that is really handy. So if you feel moved to pledge while you are talking to the brilliance of Sarah, then please do so. That would be really cool. And, feel free to share this around, tell your friends, right? There's some awesome rewards we have going on. This, for the next 10 or 9 days now, we have a limited availability reward that I really think people will like. It's personally handwritten drabbles on a postcard, which will be sent to you from some of our authors. And a drabble, for those who don't know, is a story that's exactly 100 words, but it's a complete story. I tried my hand at this myself. This is tough. This is tough to do. But it's fun. All right, so I'm going to read my little bio here that I wrote up for Sarah. And please, since this is still from the manuscript, if I get anything wrong, tell me.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so this is in regards to her story, their story. I'm so bad with that. The name Sarah trips me up. I'm very sorry. It's stupid. And I really, I identify as demigender myself. So it's not like I, want to get it wrong. So, okay.
Don't worry about it.
Okay. All right. So their story is called Red Tide Rising. So originally I did not intend to accept sci-fi westerns for this anthology unless I had a story shortage. But this fine tale, which originally appeared in Helios Quarterly in 2017, changed that plan because it was just too good to pass up. Sara is an emerging NB writer whose work has appeared in Broadswords and Blasters, Unnerving Magazine, Vulture Bones, and many other places, several of which have been mentioned already in conjunction with our other authors in their bios. Like, there's a list, and I just didn't want to repeat a bunch of it, but you can see it, I believe, on Sarah's website, which I will give the address to. I found them to be detail-oriented and intensely focused, which probably makes sense for someone who teaches at Northern Essex Community College, Massachusetts, as a day job. They write speculative own voices works on non-binary life, queerness, and mental health. I'm in support of all that, right? And their debut novel, Power Surge, was published by NineStar Press in 2018. I think you'll appreciate their keen, unvarnished sense of human nature. Sara can be found at their website, saracodair.com, which I will put in the chat, or their Twitter, where they tweet when they should be writing. Like me.
Yeah, I probably do that a lot.
I can't think. What do I do next? So let's go on Twitter and see if I get any inspiration. I don't know why we do this, but, this is not uncommon among writers. So welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
Okay, I guess first of all, did I get it right as to where you are? Because that was kind of difficult to find online. I am in
Massachusetts. Yeah,
cool.
In the Northeast.
Right on.
Yep, yeah. You're spot on.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was briefly in Massachusetts, but many years ago, and I kind of drove through Boston on a crazy, just I was on my way somewhere else. So this is all what I know about it is that I, compared to British Columbia, there were a lot of very nice old houses, and I could not understand the friend who was part of the band group that I was in from Boston at all. I could not understand a word he said, and I felt like a complete moron. But Boston is a very unique accent, right? Obviously, the rest of Massachusetts doesn't quite talk the same way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar accent, but when you're actually in the city, it's more pronounced than, like, I live 45 minutes, an hour north of Boston, and we still drop our R's a bit, but it's not as pronounced as if you're in South Boston or East Boston.
Yeah, I think he was from South Boston. This was okay, so years ago I met these people through mp3.com, and I became part of their band, and we started recording online before that was a really big, thing, right? And so I went out to Maine, which is where the rest of the band members were located, to do gigs and practice with them and stuff. There was this cheap Greyhound fare that enabled you to do that if you went you go anywhere as long as you did it in 30 days, right, in North America. So, and okay, so at one point there was me, right, with my West Coast Canadian accent, or interior BC accent, right, and the guitarist was from Connecticut, right, and the keyboardist was a native Mainer, right, and the guitarist's girlfriend was from Kentucky. And the keyboardist's girlfriend was from, I think, more like Virginia, right? And then there was Chris, who was the roadie, and he was from Boston. And I was like, I cannot understand a word you say. So just a bit of a tangent, but you don't think of that, right? Like, when we think of ourselves as being very similar culturally, but North America is hugely regional. And you see it but you don't really think about it until you're immersed in it. Have you always lived in Massachusetts, or are you from anywhere else?
I don't know. I've always lived here. I moved a town away from the town I was born in. I kind of tend to stay in the same area. I stay close to the coast.
I see why.
Yeah.
It's beautiful out there. It's so, I wouldn't want to move either. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, when I grew up, we spent our summers a little bit south, but still in Massachusetts, down in Cape Cod. This is back in the early 50s. My grandfather had been smart and bought a little plot of land down there. Now we couldn't touch anything down there. We don't have that anymore, but yeah, even when I go on vacations, I tend to not leave New England very much. Just go further. Just kind of go up to Maine and then come back.
Yeah, I guess, eh? Yeah, like I said, I don't blame you. I think it's such beautiful landscape out there. Out there, because I'm in BC, right? So literally across the continent, right? But yeah,
someday I want to go to the West Coast, though.
It's worth it. It's really beautiful out here too. Yeah. I haven't moved. I have never left the town that I was born in either, because I think it's gorgeous. So I might be forced to do the real estate prices now, though. It's getting pretty bad. I hope it's not as bad out there. But, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's I don't know. It's kind of might be tipping over out here soon.
Yeah, they say it's tipping over here too, but they've been saying that for 5 years, so I don't believe them anymore.
Okay.
I hope it is, though. That's really cool. Right. Okay, so yes, tell me about your work. When did you get serious about being a writer?
I would say I got serious about writing. It might have been maybe 4 years ago now. Because I've always liked writing and making up stories, but first I was too young. I couldn't sit still long enough. I didn't have the discipline. Then I had a job as a reporter. Then I was in graduate school. And then I was teaching, I started teaching, and it wasn't until like a couple of years after I had settled into like a routine teaching and tutoring that I was like, okay, I'm going to actually sit down and write now and finish something.
Right.
So it started with flash fiction, which kind of taught me, okay, I can write a complete story, I can finish it, and maybe even convince someone to publish it. And then from there, I was getting really high anxiety and I couldn't sleep. So instead of, trying to sleep, I'd just get up and write. And I finished a book. And then after that, I went back and I finished a book that I had started almost 10 years before. So it's kind of like, okay, I know I can write a novel now from start to finish. And I had this idea that I started multiple times, probably between when I was 18 and 23. So it's probably 27 or something, 28 when I finally went back to that, and that turned into Power Search, which is now I'm 30, so it took 3 or 4 years, maybe 3 years from when I finally went back to it and finished it, till now, probably.
That's really cool. I came from it from the totally different, like the opposite end, right? I tend to be an overwriter as opposed to an underwriter. I find flash fiction very challenging. I really like it, but I find it very hard. Which do you prefer? Do you prefer shorter fiction or longer fiction?
I tend to do extremes. So I like flash fiction, anything under 1,000 words. I get in trouble with I can do like a 2,500 words. Like I get in trouble when I try to do like novelettes, like 7,500, 10,000 words. That's the challenge.
Right.
Novels I love, but I do overwrite novels. What, 70? I think when Power Swords was published, it was 78,000 words. The first draft had been 135,000 words. So I overwrite long thing like novels, and then I cut and I cut and I cut until it's like just what it needs to be. So yeah, I don't always get that. I love really short flash fiction, and then I write these massive novels and have to cut them in half. The stuff in the middle is the harder part.
Yes. Okay, I get that. That makes sense. Yeah, this novella stuff, you're like, or even a short novel, you're like, I don't know.
Or even like I would call something a novelette that somebody else might just call like a longer short story or something, and that's where I'm working on one of those for an anthology now that I was asked to write it for, and it's interesting. I'm in the middle of like a fifth draft right now, so it's kind of an interesting part of the process to be at.
Fifth draft, I admire that. After 3, I'm like, okay.
I'll admit that, like, this one I wrote for something else. Oh, I didn't write it for something else. I just wrote it a few years ago. Not a few years ago, last year, and I didn't have any luck sending it out, so I had pulled it, and then it was asked to write a story for an anthology, and I was like, this is a perfect theme. So I revised it, sent it to my critique group, and this critique group is pretty good at finding lots of things to change and add, and they're a great group, so I'm in the process of like ripping the story up based on their feedback and piecing it back together. So
I can relate. Yeah, I got a critique group like that, and generally I find they'll often have very differing opinions, but if they all say the same thing, it needs work,
For sure.
No, that's really cool. Can you share anything about this anthology coming up, or is it all a big secret?
No, it's called, hopefully I don't mess up the title. Like, it's Behind the Moon Above the Stars. Let me.
Ooh, I noticed it already.
Still double checking it. Yeah, Behind the Moon. Yeah, it's Behind the Moon Above the Stars, and I'll read the blurb a bit because that'll be better than me just trying to describe it. A queer anthology featuring stories inspired by magic and the cosmos, a vast and beautiful place where planets, stars, comets, entire galaxies even live without borders, specifications, or binaries. Some stories will span science fiction, science fantasy, contemporary fabulism, and magical realism.
Fantastic.
And all the stories are written by either trans or non-binary authors, and they have to feature either a trans or a non-binary character.
Excellent. I'm definitely interested. You're going to have to like drop the link because that's really cool. Is it available for pre-order yet, or is it still?
No,
okay.
It's not going to be out till probably February 2020.
Okay, sure.
So it's about a year out.
Okay, well, cool. Keep me posted. I definitely would be interested in picking that up. That sounds like totally my thing. So
yeah, there's a Goodreads link, so I can send you that.
Oh, great. Okay, that's perfect. And I will include that in the video description when I upload this to YouTube. So if anybody's watching it there, they will be able to find that. So that's cool.
Good. Thank you.
So yeah, I asked. I had our Daniel Lester on already, and I already asked him the same question, which is kind of a hard question for every writer, I know. But what made you decide to be a writer, and when did you realize that you were? And yes, you can think about it at length and wander, because I know it's complex.
Well, it isn't. It isn't. I mean, I always have stories going in my head. That's just how my brain functions. I am always and have always, if I'm doing something that doesn't require my full attention, like the dishes or driving or walking the dog, there's a story playing out in my head. Whether that is on some fantasy world or it's a story about how horrible teaching my next class could go wrong. It's a story. And I know when I was in first grade, I tell the story over and over again, but we were supposed to write these journals, like just for practice, like, what we did each day. And I wrote that my friend's brother put on a superhero cape, climbed up onto the neighbor's garage, jumped and flew. And my teacher was not very happy with me. I always wonder why she didn't encourage creativity, but I think she was, I don't know what she maybe it didn't sound how I remembered it, but I got in trouble for not like writing something real.
Been there.
But
yeah.
So, I mean, I didn't sit still and write much when I was that young, but I'd watch a TV show. I'd kind of like mentally write fan fiction.
Absolutely.
And eventually it wasn't really fan fiction anymore. It was like, here's this completely, unique character that has nothing to do with the show that's going to come in and like interfere with the plot between episodes.
Uh-huh.
And then sometimes there'd be no like TV show at all. It would just be all my like made up characters like running around in my head doing stuff and fighting monsters. And I was just like, okay, sooner or later I'm going to have to sit and write this stuff down because there's just too many stories. But I hated reading for a good chunk of my life.
That's interesting. I have never heard that from a writer before. Do tell. Yeah. Why did you hate reading? I'm very curious.
From when I outgrew picture books until sophomore year of high school, I did not want to sit still and read someone else's words. I just wanted to be in my own stories in my head. I never got into other people's stories. I didn't like looking at the little letters. I'd get headaches. It was just like a very frustrating. I also thought I hated science fiction, but in reality, in high school, I realized that was what I should have been reading all along, was science fiction and fantasy. So I think part of it was I thought I was into contemporary and historical fiction when really I wasn't.
Right. And because it wasn't your thing, it started to bore you and you thought reading bored you entirely.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And the whole time, like when I would be in school, I'd get really high reading scores on things. And, so it wasn't like that I had a problem with it. It was, why would I read someone else's story when I have so many other ones in my head? It was kind of this attitude.
Do you think that being, maybe you weren't being challenged enough, right? Like that the stuff you were being given to read was beneath your capabilities, so it was dull?
I don't know. It might have been a little bit of that, but I think, to be honest, I think it was an attention issue too. I just couldn't. I don't think I had the attention span to sit down and read a whole book when I didn't have the discipline to like make myself go through it, and without some amazing story to just completely like get me to hyper focus on it, I just couldn't. If the stakes were high enough that I have to read this and pass this test, otherwise everyone's gonna think I'm stupid, then I would read it and I'd pass the test, but it wouldn't be fun.
It sounds like ADD to me. Did you have that diagnosis? My son is ADD, so.
I got that diagnosis as an adult.
Wouldn't have been nice if they'd done it at that time, right? But yeah.
Yes and no. Like my kindergarten teacher had mentioned it, but I didn't have a hard time. Like I did very well in school, which is probably why I wouldn't have gotten a diagnosis as a kid, because I didn't have trouble reading. I had high tests. I mean, I was in a Catholic school, so we didn't have the same standardized tests, but we still had testing, and I was always pretty high on everything. So, so it wasn't something that I think I would have benefited from treatment from, at least until I got to high school. But even then, I don't know. I part of it. It's a topic I could probably ramble on about forever.
Sure, I understand the complexities, right? My partner is also ADD, right? So he could, he said that he felt that maybe in many ways it was better that he didn't get a diagnosis until later in life, because he was forced to learn to adapt. I don't know if that's true or not. I know that my son really struggled. I know that they made me feed him like some medication, and really I didn't like that medication's effects at all. I thought it was much better to give him a cup of coffee, right? And then he'd be fine till lunch, and the school was like a block away, so he could come home and have another cup of coffee at lunch, and that would be more than sufficient, instead of, speed, which is of course what they feed them. So yeah, so I understand the issues there, right? Like there's
like as an adult, like I feel like I can make my own decision if I want to take medication or not. Right. And when I have to go to work, I'll take it 3 or 4 days a week, because if I'm trying to tutor and help students with their writing, and someone else is, reading someone else's paper and talking to them next to me, I can't, I just can't focus. So it's kind of a matter of like, keep the job I love, or should I do something else? But as a kid, I don't know if it would have had been as helpful.
Yeah, I don't want to give the impression that I'm against medication either. Medication obviously is, like it helps lots of people. I took antidepressants for a long time. They saved my life. I'm not against medication.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I do see that I think they sometimes, well, they used to, maybe they've gotten better with it now. They used to over medicate kids, I think. But
yeah, I mean, for other things, I think it's a completely different conversation than with ADHD. But
right, yeah, but sometimes ADHD is just inconvenient for other people. It's true.
Yeah,
and that's that's not right to force people to conform for that reason. I don't think, but
yeah, I don't know. It's that could be like hours.
yes, I could go on. I have a soapbox too. Yes, let's move on. You're quite right. Okay, so what you discovered science fiction and fantasy later on. You said you thought you hated it, but then you found that maybe it was what you should have been reading, and it's obviously what you write. At least it seems to be primarily what you write. I don't know if you write in other genres.
Just a little bit, not too much.
Okay, yeah. So, what was it that twigged you to the idea that science fiction, fantasy might be your thing?
Harry Potter and Star Wars. I don't know. Well, those were what got me into reading it, mostly because I used to do this. My local newspaper used to have a teen page that was authored by teens. And so I would review movies for them every week. And they sent me to review Harry Potter and The Prisoner of Azkaban. And I had never read a Harry Potter book in my life, had never seen a Harry Potter movie in my life. I think at that point, the first 5 books were published, and that was the 3rd movie coming out. So like, well, I'll at least read the book before I see the movie. Because at that point, I was gradually starting to get, to find that, okay, books aren't as bad, aren't as horrible as I thought they were. And so I picked it up and I read it in like a night. So then I read, I saw the movie, I reviewed it, I loved it. I read the 4th and 5th Harry Potter book. Then I went back and I read the 1st one and the 2nd one and reread the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th. And I don't know what it was about it. I think because all the stories I made up in my head had some type of, I used to like, my favorite shows were like Xena Warrior Princess and Hercules. And so I'd watch TV shows and movies that had like a fantasy element at least and liked them. In Star Wars, even though, that's kind of science fantasy because the Force is more magic than science. So that kind of transitioned me into a little bit more of a broader realm of speculative fiction. Although I think for most of high school and early college, I probably mostly just read Jim Butcher and Star Wars Expanded Universe and, then some into college more like your kind of overly famous like Holly Black, Cassandra Clare, Libra Bray, like the YA fantasy. And I don't know if I could really ever pinpoint like what initially caught my attention about it, like how I went from historical fiction to fantasy and space opera, and I don't know. It's a good question.
You're like thinking about it now and you're going, I don't really know how this happened, I guess.
Figure out like, or even how did I not know that like how did it take me so long to figure that out? Like if I'd make up stories like about Xena like battling like monsters and Greek gods and whatnot, how did I not know I liked that genre? How did I not?
I think it has to do with marketing. This is something I've observed before, and I've been trying to figure out a way to crystallize it. So this is like kind of off the cuff, but okay, I've noticed that the science fiction and fantasy section of the bookstore, right, gets smaller and smaller and smaller every year, and they start putting it in the back and stuff. And they say science fiction and fantasy doesn't sell, right? Except that's totally not true. Actually, we know that now. I'm not going to get into it right now, but right, it's just that people are also buying independently published books as well as traditionally published books, and so the independent market is not reflecting on the data, okay, because they don't survey that. But that aside, right, in the meantime, the young adult section is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's at the front of the store, right, and they don't seem to separate genre there, I have noticed. Right?
Yeah, they don't. So, not much. One of my local bookstores does have a separate a little bit, but anyways, continue.
No, that's cool. I admire your bookstore because this seems to be the exception, right? But the thing is, you go in there, of course, and what do you got, right? You got Harry Potter, you got the Hunger Games, you got Artemis Fowl, you've got, like it's all science fiction fantasy. To find stuff that isn't is actually the exception, I think, nowadays, and they all put it in one section. So how are you supposed to know, right? That's, I think that's reasonable, actually. But I heard an animal in the background there. I think is that is that a dog?
The dog came in and got a drink of water.
That's cool. What kind of dog do you have?
Tavi is everything. No, he's a rescue from Tennessee, and one of his litter mates had one of those doggy DNA tests. And the test said he was 75% unknown terrier mix. And then the remaining 25% was golden retriever, boxer, husky, and Staffordshire terrier.
Aha. All right. Darwin's grab bag. Got it.
Yeah, he's about 50 pounds. He looks like a goat.
Looks like a goat.
He's got like the scruffy face and he's got a beard and he hikes like he's a mountain goat.
That is awesome.
And acts like a cat.
It acts like a cat because he grew up with cats, right? Yeah.
Yeah. The first 5 months of his life, he was at a foster, which was basically, it wasn't really a foster so much as somebody who people brought dogs to her instead of to the shelter because she had connections with rescues up here.
Right.
So supposedly we talked to her on the phone before the rescue agency up here brought him up, the foster, and she at that point had 50 dogs on a property, all waiting to get all that had either been abandoned or she had taken them out of kill shelters that were all, like they're on their way to come up north.
Right.
So, but I guess he hung out with the barn cats more than the other dogs.
Right.
And then when he got here, he was 6 months old, and so he came home to my cat.
Right.
And my mom's dog hangs out here during the day, a few days a week, and that dog was raised by 2 cats. So,
got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. He's like hanging out there. You're checking him out, were you? Yeah. That's great.
You know, I had given him like a chicken chew to keep him busy, but he seems to have.
It happens. It's all good. Yeah, it's too bad he's 50 pounds. I would make you like lift him up and show him off to us. So
he can still do that.
He can? Well, hello, sweetheart. Oh, you're right. He does kind of look like a goat. Aww. Look at that face. That is a face that could charm, you know,
look at the camera.
Food out of anybody, I think. That's
yeah.
He's
like, I am not going to look at that camera. No.
No. He's not. That's okay. He did for a minute. We saw his face. It's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, he's beautiful. That's great.
So now he's just going to sit on my lap.
Hello. Hello. No problem.
Like, I'm here now. I don't want to get down.
You know, I do enough of these kind of things where I talk to people and there's always animals and children and, you know, it's all, I think roll with it, right? I think that it's cool. I mean, because, when we do these, right, I want to know about who you are and I want to know about what you do, right? So this is part of who you are. It's part of what you do. So that's all very cool. If he's comfy there, that's just fine by me.
Yep, oversized lap dog.
So what do you teach when you are teaching at the college?
I teach English Composition 1 and then Writing Fusion, which is a developmental course. So the students that that don't do well on the placement test, they have to take that as a support course. And some of them, about half of them are, it's their first semester when they take that class. The other half came out of the ESL program, but they still need a little bit more help before they're, quite at college level writing in English. So, so it turns into a mix of, in the support class, there'll be people that have been out of school so long that, they just need extra help to get back up to speed. People that struggled with it in high school for different reasons, and people that aren't native speakers. It turns into an interesting.
Sounds complicated. Do you like it?
I do. That second class that is the support classes in a computer lab. So I love being able to work with students one-on-one instead of as when a class with 22 people, I don't get to know them all, but when I have the 10 that come with me to the second class, I really get to know everyone better. And it's a little extra work when I find myself kind of approaching the class differently for a few different groups, but at the same time, I don't know, it's a challenge, but it's a good one.
Nothing wrong with that. That's great. That's cool.
Yeah.
I imagine that I think that would be a lot of fun personally. You meet all kinds of different people and seeing that moment when the connection is made and they go, aha, I get it, right? That's
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question and I forgot what it was. Just a second. It's very early for me, so I'm, not as awake as I should be, right? So I normally get up about now, right?
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and
Yes.
on the East Coast it's 11:11. So
yeah, I know you're like, it's the middle of the day. What the hell? I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm a teacher. What are you doing? Yeah.
Well, I don't teach in the morning.
Oh, good.
I teach night classes. I work in the tutoring center like 9 to 2, 9 to 3, and then my classes I teach are from 6 to 9. But Fridays I don't go into work. Fridays I'm home in the morning, and then I go up and visit my mom in the afternoon. So that's why I was like, if the interview's Friday morning, I can do it.
Right. Got it. Yeah, that's cool.
Otherwise, my days are like 9 to 9.
Yeah, you sound very busy. I admire you for finding time to write and all of that craziness. That's really good for you.
I feel like it's 9 to 9, but I do have breaks. So
you write cracks. That's what you do.
I tutor 9 to 2 or 9 to 3, and then I come home, walk the dog, write, and then I go back at 6.
Brilliant.
But in those like breaks, like I couldn't do the Skype interview because I'm either walking the dog or it's my 1 hour of time I have to write.
Yeah, no, you got to protect that. You have to protect that. If you don't, then you will never get to do it. This is something I have learned. So don't feel bad about that at all. No, that's great. I was gonna, I remember now what I was gonna ask. I was, okay, so you say you got into journalism, right? And you're talking about how you were writing for your local paper as a teenager, right? And then you went into teaching from there, right? I wonder, often see a lot of writers do that kind of thing, right? It's okay. I want to be a creative writer. So what did I do? I did journalism and I did teaching. Was this because somebody gave you the advice of you're never going to get paid for the creative writing? So oh, good. Okay.
At that point, I hadn't ever finished a complete story at that point. So
I understand that too. Yeah.
That was a weird thing too, because up until high school, I wanted to do marine biology.
Sure.
But I wasn't the best at math. Like, I was always stronger in writing and reading than I was in math and science. I think I was better at math than I thought, but I wasn't. My teachers. So, like, I don't know. There were other kids in the class that were better at me than math, and I was better at writing than them. So I kind of got lumped into, like, your.
Right, the art students and the science students, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then in high school, that ended up getting reinforced a bit. I had been placed into all honors classes except for the math and science. And I ended up moving myself into honors STEM classes. And I took advanced chemistry my senior year, which was a big mistake. But
why was that a big mistake?
It was... I couldn't keep up with all the math. That like pushed beyond my. I didn't have enough of a background in like. I think because a lot of the other kids had taken more advanced math classes freshman and sophomore year than I hadn't been in the advanced math classes, that I was missing like some math. I don't know.
Can relate again.
I just didn't have the like. Because chemistry is so much math, and I just didn't have a strong enough math background to like keep up.
Right.
That was my first C that I ever got.
Oh yeah, I know.
I'm a bit of an overachiever, but
yeah, you were A's and sometimes B's, and B's meant you were doing bad, and then you got a C, and you were like devastated. Yeah.
I probably had like B plus A minus was probably my, my that was like what I did without being really focused, without paying more attention than I had to. I'd get by with like a B plus A minus, and I wasn't valedictorian or anything. I didn't have the drive for that, but I was mostly happy with B plus, A minus. But when I
Sure.
got down to like a B minus or a C plus, then I was kind of like, this is dangerous.
Right. Okay, I derailed you, and I didn't intend to. Right. We were talking about why I went into journalism and teaching.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to blame my high school senior year English teacher for really getting me into literature and writing. And then junior year, I had a journalism teacher in high school that I really admired, and she really got me into like high school newspaper. She had gotten me connected with that. Maybe that was sophomore year. Might have been sophomore year. She got me connected with that that newspaper. And so because I had done the teen page for the newspaper, which started out, oh, I'm going to write something and it's going to be published somewhere. This is really cool. I thought, oh, maybe journalism would be a fun career. I thought maybe, I don't want to have to do all the technical stuff that I would to get a degree in a science, but, I could focus on like environmental reporting or something. And,
Sure.
It would be kind of this like, I probably watched too many movies where like journalists save the day or something. I had this kind of like romanticized ideal of like investigative reporting, and so that's what I studied when I went to. I actually went to the community college I teach at,
Cool.
and I did their school newspaper. I got an internship with a local paper, which turned into a part-time job that I did while I transferred to another school. But I realized that reporting was not what I thought it was, especially in small towns. And that was the last job I ever wanted to do. I hated it. Like,
Sure.
So, as much as I liked the freedom of like being a freelancer, I thought, oh, I'm not even, I'm still working my bachelor's degree and I'm a freelance writer. This is awesome, but it wasn't. So then I focused more on creative writing, which at that point now, I was at UMass Lowell. I was taking classes with Andre Debus the third. Was actually like a successful writer, but he actually made money off of writing. But he also was clear that that's not like the odds of that aren't always high.
He won the Paralympics, and he let you know. Yeah.
Yeah, he won the Oprah lottery. They call it. But, so he was pretty upfront about that. But at that point, I was thinking, well, teaching had been in the back of my mind. Like, I'd be a reporter while I was young and energetic, and then eventually I'd like teach, because that's what some of my professors at the community college had done. They had worked, in their 20s and into their 30s, in like a high energy job, and then they switched to teaching, which at the time I didn't realize quite how high energy of a job teaching was. But so I was like, well, maybe I won't be a reporter at all. Maybe I'll just be a teacher. So then I went, from my bachelor's, I didn't get a job out of college that paid much. I ended up working as a portrait photographer of all things, because I'd done photography when I was
which photographer? Sorry,
portrait.
Oh, cool. Okay, see, writers' resumes. Writers' resumes always look like this. There's always. I intended to do X, but then I had to do Y. So then I learned how to do Z.
For the newspaper, if I took my own pictures, I basically made double the money, because I'd be getting paid as the photographer and the writer. And I'd taken some photography classes, when I was a freshman, sophomore, and so I had the experience of taking pictures for the newspaper. So then I wasn't getting. I think I had applied for like content editor, or content writer jobs for websites. There's some like editing jobs for companies, and I wasn't really getting anything, so I started applying for photography jobs, and I got hired at, it was like these weren't anything too fancy. It was just one of those portrait studios in the mall. I worked there for a season, and then I worked at another one until I quit after a year and a half, because I couldn't deal with a third Christmas and retail photography.
Can't blame you. That sounds like hell to me. Yeah.
People trying to, 10-minute photo sessions to get multiple children under 5 to sit still and smile at the same time and actually get a and then do it again and again and again. So then I did that all through graduate school. I was a teaching assistant. I tutored for the UMass Boston, and then finally, when I graduated from there, I was like, okay, I've given up the photography job. I've got this degree now and, an extra $10,000 in debt. What am I going to do?
Right. Teaching seemed the natural course.
I called the department chair that was still the same department chair from when I had started school. And I was like, you have any classes? And I had also gone into the tutoring center there and handed the director of tutoring my resume. And a few days before maybe a week before the semester started, the English department chair called me and said, oh yeah, I got a class or two that I need someone to cover. And at that point, I also had 2 classes somewhere else. And so I went in, interviewed for the couple classes at the community college, and then they brought me down to the dean for a second interview, and the dean's like, oh yeah, Sarah's also going to be tutoring for us. You guys haven't told me a decision on that yet.
Right. You're like, thanks for putting me on the spot and volunteering me. Yeah.
That was kind of how I had found out I had actually gotten the tutoring job while I was interviewing for the teaching. Right. And so cool. I taught at UMass in Northern Essex, and I tutored, and then the next semester I taught at Bunker Hill Community College as well, which was in Boston. So for a few years, I was driving back and forth between actually 4 campuses, because the one I work at now, we have 2 campuses. So it was, the names of towns tiring. Yeah, but then as I settled into one and not 4 campuses or 2 campuses, then that's the less I've had a commute between campuses, the more time I have to write. So
makes sense. Exactly. Although at one point I was doing a commute and I started dictating. And then I would edit it later, right, on my phone. So, but yeah, I totally get you. I prefer not to do that. I find that very difficult, but you do what you got to, right? Because you got to write. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Speaking of which, tell us a bit about your novel. Tell us a bit about Power Surge.
I'm horrible about talking about it if I'm not writing about it.
Every writer in the world is. They say, give us the elevator pitch. And you're like, you got an hour? Yeah, I know, right?
So when people ask me about Power Surge, I usually ask, have you seen Supernatural?
Right. Okay. Yes.
Or have you read, and then have you read Mortal Instruments? And if you've read Mortal Instruments and seen Shadowhunter and seen, not Shadowhunters, it's the same thing, Supernatural. It's kind of in the middle of those 2.
Neat. Okay. That's cool.
Because it's, I don't know, it's so you've got the main character, Erin, who has a slew of mental health problems, and has been medicated for different things on and off, but it never works how it's supposed to.
Right.
They always end up with the side effects that 10% of people get or something.
Got it.
It will work great for a while, and then Erin would start. This is hardly on the page, but that's kind of the setup. And eventually, Erin gives up because they just they end up with these allergic reactions and all and they just can't take the medication they need. So right. At the beginning of the book, they're trying to, they're in their senior year of high school and they're trying to figure out how they're gonna, keep their grades up for the last couple few months, and how they're gonna figure out how to cope with their anxiety and their depression without medication.
Right.
And they also start seeing things, which at first they think is just another list of diagnoses they're going to add to an already long list, but it's not.
Reasonable assumption, yeah.
Which is, on another tangent, I always get annoyed at how that is used in fantasy. So in this book, it was important that, okay, well, my narrator is just as, their brain's just as messed up whether they're hallucinating or not.
Right.
They're already So okay, so we're not gonna, in the end, they're not gonna add this extra thing to their list of diagnoses, but now on top of having to figure out how to deal with, okay, how do I actually manage my anxiety off medication? I also have to deal with the fact that there's a demon hunting me, and it's real, and my family's been lying to me since I was 5 years old when my father died. My father, who did not die in a hiking accident, but was actually killed by a demon. Oh, wow. So that's the premise. Like I said, I'm horrible at talking about this. So as Erin is trying to like navigate this world that their family has hid them from, they're also simultaneously trying to figure out, finally having given up on getting the right medication, how am I going to deal with both of these things? And they make a lot of slip back into some bad habits, but eventually they gradually start to figure things out. Yeah, okay. Yeah,
no spoilers. But no, I'm intrigued already. I'm like, wow, that's cool. And I could definitely see how there's a niche there. There are a lot of kids who struggle with mental health problems, right? They want to see people like them reflected in literature, right? And you're right. Everybody treats it like a punchline or a plot device, right? They don't ever treat it like, this is just part of your personality. And they often give it, there's myths that get perpetuated that are not the way that shit works. It just doesn't work. And they use it like that. And you're right. I tend to get, there's mental health issues in my family, so I tend to get a little cross about that business myself. So good for you approaching it from a more, I don't know.
One thing
perspective.
I think as I revised it, one thing I was trying to do is, like, when I was in high school, I probably should have been on antidepressants, but I wasn't. I was, I refused to take any medication when I was 15 or 16 because I thought it was going to change my personality, which was complete bullshit.
Yep.
So instead, what I ended up doing with Power Surge, and this was not my intention when I started writing it, but as an adult looking back at myself, I thought, well, what if I was, a teenager and there was this character I really admired that wanted to be on medication but couldn't take it? Because if you tell like a teenager they can't have something, what are they gonna... So that if stubborn 16-year-old me who would not get help saw somebody who wanted it but didn't have access to the right thing, how would that have changed my perspective on it?
That's really cool, actually.
And so that, and that's, that's kind of a subplot in it. It's not the main thing, but it's there. And I won't say too much about the sequel because I don't want to spoil it, but in the sequel, Erin is actually back on medication, but it's not...
It's still not doing what it's supposed to.
No, it is doing what it's supposed to, but it's not anything like she would have gotten prescribed, or they would have... I see, now I'm misgendering my own characters.
Right.
So that's something Erin would have gotten prescribed from a doctor they had access to before they found out about the supernatural world. If I say too much more than that, I think I'll get into spoiling stuff from book one.
Right.
But
fair enough.
The gender thing too is interesting because when I first wrote Power Surge, I used Erin used she, and then as I became more aware of my gender identity, I actually changed it.
Sure.
The character, because I was seeing things about myself that made me realize my own identity, and then I'm like, that character has that in common, kind of. So I'm gonna kind of pull it out more. So sometimes if I slip into the wrong pronoun, it's because for like the first 5 drafts.
Right, it was she.
I was using she for Erin, and then like the next 4 drafts, I switched to they.
No, that's cool. I think it's important to have literature out there. I have a non-binary child, right? They would really appreciate having more people like them in literature. So that's really cool that you're doing that. I will recommend them to your book, actually, because that sounds like totally their thing, right? They love supernatural. They love Mortal Instruments. They're going to love your story, I think. That's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and speaking of stories, all right, Red Tide Rising, without spoilers, what inspired it? Oh, that's hard, eh? Okay. No, hey, you know what? I've been inspired by weird thoughts, just like the one you were just telling me. What would happen if this happened instead of that? right? So whatever you say is cool.
I think that one might have been a random word generator story.
Oh, cool. Okay, I love that. That's great.
It's been, because that one is a reprint, and when it was published was probably 6 months after I had written it. So it's been a while, but I think part of it had been a random word generator for the opening scene, which I thought was going to be flash fiction, but then it wasn't. It was a whole story.
Sure.
There also might have been a little bit of Firefly influence, because I think I had been watching. I
can see it.
I've been watching Firefly then, but at least half of my short stories start with me going to a random word generator and having it give me 3 words.
That's great. I admire that. Do you remember what the 3 words were by any chance?
No.
It's really interesting. Our Daniel Lester's story. He said it was also started in a similar way. He entered a contest and they give you random prompts, and it's like that. It's random word generators, and that's the story that he ended up with. So that's interesting. I wonder, right? Because fantasy Western, right, is obviously not something that a lot of people are approaching, right? It's like, I find it's a hard sell, right? I find it's very difficult to get people to even give it a shot, because people are like, oh, I don't like fantasy, or I don't like Western, and they don't want to, but I think that there's something really cool that goes on there in that blend of genres that you don't think would otherwise fit, right? So I really love it. And I get compared to Firefly a lot, right? So I get that, but Firefly isn't the only thing out there. It's just something people actually know.
Yeah.
Right. So often I find that when I want to know why people want to write in this weird genre, right? Because a lot of people don't, but yet I had an overwhelming number of submissions for this anthology. It was huge. And it's like, I feel like people have these little projects, and they're like, oh, nobody's doing this, and this is such a weird thing. And they maybe they printed it once and then they put it in their back catalog, or they come up with it and they can't sell it. And right. And I don't know anybody yet. There may have been, I think there were 1 or 2 people like who ended up in the anthology who were inspired by the call. But most people were like, oh, this is perfect for my little thing that won't fit anywhere else. So that's it. I like to hear why people chose to approach it. So that's really interesting. I love your story, by the way. I love your characters are, you say a lot with, you can see the flash fiction influence, because you say a lot with a very few words. You paint a broad brushstroke, and I know who this person is, right? And that's excellent. I admire your ability to do that, and I think it's a lot of fun. So
thank you.
Is there anything you want to add, stuff coming up that you've got that you want to draw people's attention to before we say goodbye for the day?
I don't think so. I've, after years of having like a constant stream of short stories coming out, the past 1.5 or 2 years, I've been so focused on novels that I actually have this, and then their Power Surges sequel might, if I'm lucky, be out in November.
Right. Do you have a tentative title for it yet?
Either Power Inversion or Blackout.
Cool.
I haven't decided between those 2, or I could come up with something different. Yeah, I have a poem coming out, I think, in Vulture Bones in the spring, but
nice.
And I have this.
Right.
But this is like the least stuff I've had coming out in the future, in at least for short fiction, in a long time.
Well, sure, if you write a lot of flash fiction, then that's, it's easier to move.
Yeah.
And it's, you can make it faster too, right? So
right, yeah, it would be like every month I'd have a new piece of flash or a drabble or something coming out, and in like 3 years, I've been at that for like, this is my 4th year now, and I had close to 50. If you count like the drabbles, the flashes, and the short stories, I've had over 50 things published on websites and anthologies.
Fantastic.
A lot of them were really short. So it's, it sounds like a lot, but it's a lot of like small works. But then, looking forward, I'm like, I really need to get up my short story game again.
Yeah. Well, we've only got so much time in the day, right? And
Yeah.
novels are, they're big projects. They're like building a castle, right? As opposed to, slapping up the, prefab house where you've got all the, little tools already and you can just, put it together. Not to say that there's anything, lesser about either. They're both different art forms. They're done in different ways, right? But yeah, it takes a lot more time to do.
I mean, if you're if you're going to build a shed versus you're going to build a, 5-bedroom house, you're going to use the same tools and the same materials, but it's not as much space or time or something.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for doing this with us today. And check out her story in Gunsmoke and Dragonfire. Check out her. Sorry, I'm doing it again. I'm such an idiot. Check out their story. Me too. I feel like such an idiot. Okay.
Honestly, and online when things are written about me, I prefer when I'm talking with people, either she or they, I use them interchangeably.
I'm sorry. Okay. Check out their story. Red Tide Rising in Gunsmoke and Dragonfire, and check out Power Surge. And you can find a link to most of the stuff that they have published on their website. And I do believe you have an Amazon page too, don't you? I think I said that. Yes. Okay. Yeah. And thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you for hosting.
All right, and we'll see you in a couple days. I'll be interviewing Ron S. Friedman as well, for those of you who are following along and playing at home. So, all right.
Bye. Thank you.